In this video, we'll look at 4 different ways to draw on your wooden panels. We'll look at drawing with graphite and colored pencils, as well as using markers and pens and charcoal. So grab your materials and let's get started. First, I just want to give you the reminder that wood has been used as a support for art making for thousands of years. This example is from about 170 Common Era, and it is an example of the well-known portrait paintings made on wood for mummies once the Roman Empire took over Egypt. Also, a lot of the paintings that you have seen in art history class from the Renaissance and Baroque periods were also made on wooden supports. This is a great example of a painting by Vasari. You can see it on the wall, and then on the other side you actually see it being conserved, and so you can see it flipped over and the wooden panels on which the painting was made. Okay, let's talk a little bit about wood itself. For this assignment, you will need 3 wooden circles, and I hope you've picked them up from Dick Blick or a craft store. In that case, they're most likely birch or maybe even basswood, both of which are fairly blonde in color and have a tight, even, uniform grain. You do not want to use a wood such as pine that you would pick up from Home Depot. Pine is a wood that's very soft. It's also really sappy and has a wide open grain. That's going to make it hard to draw on. Birch and basswood, however, are beautiful for drawing on. And some of the artists we've looked at in class already, like Mark Francino, actually draw on other hardwoods like maple or oak. Bass and birch are just much cheaper. The biggest difference between wood and paper, of course, is wood grain. As I'm moving my pencil here, I'm actually moving with the grain. And you can see how the pencil is paralleling the direction of the wood grain itself. Now I'm drawing against the grain. And these are going to feel very different. So let's take a moment and understand why. When my pencil goes with the grain, my marks will feel more even, the process will feel more smooth. The reason being is I'm actually following one type of material, of the many within the wood, across that surface. Drawing against the grain, I'm actually going across hard and soft materials of the wood, and it will feel very different. One of the reasons we are using these 2-sided panels is so you can have one back side to play with and try little experiments like this. What does it feel like to draw with the grain? What does it feel like to draw against? How much does the media bleed? And things like that before you commit to the other side. So please experiment as we go through this process. Okay, let's get started. So I'm jumping in with graphite and I'm quickly laying out the items of my drawing. Once I know the big places, I'm going to start blocking in my big shapes of value. So this is going to sound and seem very similar to when we did our drawing review at the beginning of the semester. And from there, I'll just keep going, working with middle grounds and just blocking things in, big shapes. Working with the graphite on the wood actually feels a lot like drawing on paper. In fact, all of the media will feel a lot like working on paper. So as we go along through this video, I'll point out the differences and some things to keep in mind with working on wood rather than paper, and help you create and have fun with this beautiful surface. Okay, once I've got things blocked in, I'm going to build back in and start to add more detail. The blocking in is just getting me started, and now I'm umping things up. So as you're working, you want to think about how graphite is going to lay down on the wood. You can see my quick examples here, 8B, 2B, and F, and I encourage you to do the same on the back side of your wooden panels. Notice how much the grain comes through on the softer 8B when I lightly put it down versus the eft. The soft material falls into the green more than the harder material does. Knowing that as I'm working, even in my darker areas, I'm not going to opt necessarily for my softest pencil, but actually using a medium pencil with a little bit more pressure and buildup. Our goal for these drawings is to keep the wood grain in some areas intact so that it's part of the drawing, and I've decided to do that with this glacier area. So now I'm just continuing to build up and refine my shapes and forms as I move along. In here, I'm close to the final steps of the drawing as I start to lay and deal with the forms in the sky. Notice how I have played with atmospheric perspective, and the closer mountains are much darker and the ones moving away get softer and closer to the sky nearby. As I finish this up, just the cool reminder that wood is a very tactile surface and you can use that to your advantage. You can erase on it, you can blend on it, and you can do just about everything you can do on paper with wood, and in fact, even more. All right, here's my finished demonstration piece. You can see how I use the medium and firmer pencils to build up the mountains to get the textures of those rocky crags versus using the softer pencils for the atmospheric quality of the sky and the mountains that go away. The wood grain comes through, as I mentioned previously, and I want to encourage you to think about composing in a way that the wood grain is interactive and a big part of the composition. Okay, let's get started with colored pencils. And once again, I'm going to encourage you to start with a basic layout, blocking in your shapes before you get going. Once I've done that, this is where I really want to reiterate the fact that you certainly can erase on wood. The only time that you're not going to be able to is if you've really scratched and scraped into the wood, or you've pushed the media really into the pores of the wood grain. But if you're just drawing lightly on top like I did and setting up and gesturing through this composition, you should be able to erase with a vinyl eraser without any problems. All right, let's have fun with some colored pencils. So I'm using the Dick Blick brand pencils. They work fairly well and they're not too expensive. I've picked out my color palette and I'm starting with my lightest shapes, just getting a wash of yellow and this peachy color onto the orchids. I'll build off of that as we keep going along. Okay, with my base in place, I'm going to start adding in some more saturated colors and building off. I like that base to be there so it can kind of shine through and give some glow underneath and gives me something to respond to as I develop the drawing along. For each layer, I'm working with a minor amount of pressure. Remember that colored pencils have a wax in them. That's the binder that holds the pigment together into the stick form. So if you're really pounding down with a lot of pressure, it can get very waxy and goopy. So I want to encourage you to think soft, light layers as you're drawing with colored pencil. As you can see, I'm going along, I'm building in more detail, and I'm layering back and forth dark on light, and sometimes I'll put light on top of dark as well as a means to blend and get a nice glow to things. Just thought I'd put this cute guy in here to make sure you're still paying attention. Are you with me, guys? Let's keep drawing. Of course, too, as I'm working, I'm thinking of cross contour. I'm thinking about marks that make sense to what I'm drawing. My items are soft petals, so I want to have my marks close together to get that kind of velvety surface that orchid petals have. Your drawing might be different, so make your marks in a way that makes sense to what you are indeed drawing. Now, since our wood panels have a very subtle yellow tone to them, it is akin to drawing on toned paper. So I can certainly add in brighter highlights with my white colored pencil, as you just saw me doing here. And I also often pick up my graphite pencil to reinforce depth and detail. So certainly feel free to do that as you're working with the colored pencils. And here we go, the finished piece. Again, a combination of the colored pencils, slowly built up, and then going back in with the graphite to reinforce areas of detail. All right, let's get going with our third media. Markers and pens, some of our favorites. So it's really crucial, and I can't emphasize this enough. If you're going to work with markers and pens, you have to start with a background drawing. Well, maybe I don't have to say have to, but most people are going to feel more comfortable because, of course, our pens and markers cannot be erased. They work really beautifully on the wood. You just have to be mindful of bleed. So light pressure is going to be your best friend. Again, working with the markers, I think in terms of hatching and cross-hatching and building up those marks to get both the volume. You can see I'm going in round shapes around the stem to get that roundness, and building up to get the value that I want as well. So the time lapse goes really quick, but as you knew, this took quite some time to get there. So you certainly have to have patience when working this way, but the wood surface is a lot of fun to work on with these pens. And here we go. Here's my finished thistle drawing. I really like how the wood grain feels like wind or the sky moving gently behind it. So again, compose with that wood grain while you're working. All right, here we go. Last but not least, our final media, charcoal. So to keep things nice and neat, I'm working with pencil forms of charcoal. I really like working with those, but you could work with stick or vine, although you might have better luck with the stick rather than the vine charcoal for this process. So the texture of the wood will take charcoal beautifully. So as you're working, keep that in mind. It's going to be a lot like working with a coarsely textured paper, which works well for charcoal. You can lay it down easily and softly with a lot of different approaches. Once I got quite a bit of the charcoal down, I decided to blend it a little bit. So you can see I just grabbed a Q-tip. You can use any sort of tool of that nature, but be discriminate. You don't want to blend so that everything looks exactly the same, right? You want some different textures. And I also am showing here in the quick few seconds here that you can not only blend, you can easily work subtractively with the charcoal. So I grabbed my click eraser and went in and removed some of the charcoal to get some light glow and some lighter textures. I also did some drawing just by rubbing the charcoal up against the Q-tip and getting some very soft tones onto the panel that way. Okay, so here we go. Here's my finished charcoal demonstration. So now you know not only how to draw with charcoal on these panels, but colored pencils, pens and markers, and graphite as well. So I'm curious to see what you do with your 3 wooden panels for this assignment.